Assalamu alaikum. First of all,
Recording in progress.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Humam Hawari, and I will be the moderator for today's seminar. At first, in the name and in the behalf of Asbar Forum, I would kindly like to thank all the participants for being here today, and I would like to thank the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies for accepting our cooperation for today's program. And I want also to thank our technical team from now and our translator for the effort they will be giving. And before we start, I would like to tell everybody to move to the Arabic rooms down below in the corner. If you want to hear the original sound, stay in the original room so you can hear the original sound of the speakers. Before we start, basically, Asbar Forum is an annual development forum that has been established in 2016. It is concerned by introducing knowledge society, digital transformation, innovation, new job opportunities, and future prospects. The forum aims to be at the foremost at conferences that provides tools, procedures, methodologies, and practices to everybody in order to benefit from the social and economic knowledge and make it in a reality. And of course, to make the influence of knowledge on the society something tangible through creating and integrating and using knowledge to become the main practice for everybody. The forum is one of the first Arabic world to publish books and research about future studies. So before I start with our first speaker, I would like Mr. Abdul Wahab to actually introduce our Dr. Fahad. You have all the microphone.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، حياكم الله جميعا. كيف حالكم طيبين؟ أنا أخوكم عبد الله الزهراني. في البداية أرحب بالدكتور فهد العرابي رئيس مجلس إدارة منتدى أسبار. سيبدأ إن شاء الله هذا الملتقى. هذا الملتقى هو أحد مبادرات منتدى أسبار. أترك الكلمة الآن للدكتور فهد العرابي الحارثي ليتفضل مشكورا بطرح ورقته والبداية. تفضل دكتور فهد. افتح المايك يا دكتور. تفضل دكتور، نسمعك.
تسمعوني الحين؟
نعم، تفضل دكتور.
طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولاً أود أن أبدأ بالشكر الجزيل لكل الرجال والنساء الذين ساهموا في تنظيم هذا الملتقى المهم والذي ينتظره كثير من المهتمين بموضوع المستقبل. حتى الآن هم ليسوا كثيرين في عالمنا العربي، لكنهم هذا العلم بدأ يأخذ مكانه ومساحته في وجدان وفي تفكير كل المهتمين بالمستقبل. كنا لما نتكلم في الماضي عن المستقبل كثير من الناس كانوا يعتقدون أن الموضوع هو موضوع يعني رجما بالغيب كما يقال أو ادعاءات منجمين. لم يكن هناك يعني إدراك حقيقي لم يكن هناك إدراك حقيقي لأنه هذا اليوم ومنذ زمن ليس قريب هو علم مستقل وعلى درجة كبيرة من الأهمية، وكثير من الدول المتقدمة مهتمة في هذا كثيرا. على سبيل المثال الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بلغ عدد المؤسسات التي تعنى فيها بدراسة المستقبل أكثر من 1200 مؤسسة ومعهد. وطبعا السويد كانت من أوائل الدول التي أنشأت وزارة كاملة سمتها وزارة المستقبل، كان هذا في عام 1973. طبعا الدراسات المستقبل كما قلت هي ليست رجما بالغيب ولا تكهنات، هي منهج يعتمد على دراسة الماضي، دراسة دقيقة وتحليل الواقع وتحدياته ومؤثراته وفرصه ومهدداته، وبالتالي استشراف المستقبل، محاولة بناء تصور أو سيناريو أو أكثر من سيناريو للمستقبل بناء على معطيات دراسة الماضي ودراسة الواقع. طبعا هذه الدراسات ليست أيضا طرف أكاديمي. هذه الدراسات اللي متعلقة بالمستقبل هي تأتي لتؤدي دور مهم لمخطط وصانع القرار. يضع قرارات
for decision makers, so that they have visions on a solid ground, which will be affecting the future of the people. The main goal of the futuristic studies is to give a way for the people who want to establish the future, whether they were politicians or people in development or economists. There's so many names if you want to look at this issue. There are so many titles and slogans, which you'll see. You see that this is called futures research. Sometimes it's called futuristic future studies. Sometimes it's called the science or future of futurology. Sometimes it's called futurism. So the term which most of the people use, according to the International Future NGO Studies, is the future studies, and about most of the people who have been participating in this have voted for this, and 25% for futuristics. And also, so for me, I will not take the time speaking to you alone, because today we have scholars who are specialized in this topic. They have more knowledge than me, and they have more in-depth knowledge about this than me. However, I would like to mention why Aspar had taken this into consideration, and why Aspar Center is working. Why do we take or give a special care for the future? Aspar Forum is one of the initiatives which have come stemmed out of the initiative of the Aspar Center for Research Studies. At one point, we started to feel in the center that we need to organize a scientific forum which will target, which will have a special feature, so that we selected the new economies, the society of knowledge and the futuristic studies, because we believed, and this was 6 years ago, that this is the futures, and that the knowledge society is the future. That's why we established our forum. Since the day one, we always concentrated on whatever is related to the future, starting with the employment in the future. And this is something which a number of people have presented papers on this with us. McKinsey was one of the companies. For the first time, they gave a paper about the employment in the future, and this was in Aspar Center. As well, in the last 5 years, we have also gave a foreseeing of the future for the important sectors till 2050. So till 2050, and in our last term of work, or the one before, we had an important title, which was, the main title was the future of the future. And here we had a number of papers which had been presented, which tackle the future. In the last few years, we as well had published the first book about futuristic studies under the title of Transforming the Society, and this was issued by Aspar Forum in Arabic. The English version was published by another company in Britain. However, the book itself have been made in cooperation with an organized international organization you all know, which is UNESCO. For the first time, we do this in Arabic. As well, the forum for the first time in Arabic publishes an encyclopedia of the terms of the futuristic terminology. And for the first time in Arabic, we have published this, and this was done by Aspar, International Aspar Forum. Aspar has a list of achievements. I don't want to market the forum, however, we want to draw the attention to this science, to this new methodology, which would be enlightening the organizations, the institutions, also officials, in regard to building the scenarios, real scenarios for the future, whether on the political, economic, or development levels. We have issued 48 reports All of them target talking about the futuristic studies, and they are available for everyone for free in Arabic and in English. Of course, the forum had launched today. In this period, we have a competition today, an Arab competition, an international competition, which is called the Hackathon of the Media, the challenges of the future, which are going to face the media in the world, not just in Saudi Arabia. This is an Saudi Arabia initiative which has been launched in cooperation with the International Aspar Forum and Towson University, which is one of the important universities, the Abdullah King University for Technology and Science, and we are going to establish committees to look at the presented initiatives, and next September, we will announce the results. We have competitors from all around the world, not just from Saudi Arabia. We as well, in this session, we have as well, we always have sessions like this, but we today have a specific interest for this because we have important scholars and thinkers who are participating with us, who are known around the world. The other issue is that this is a teaser for the future, which is going to be which is going to be or how Aspar is going to look. Aspar in 2018, under the patronage of the Prince of Riyadh, we had announced that we are going to establish an institute for the future studies, Aspar Future Studies Center. And we have planned for this, and we thought about how to establish this and how to have an impact, an influence. And this is why we wanted to be patient, so that we can have everything ready in regard to the needs of this institute, so that our initiative is useful on the level of the Arab world. This is the first. We have decided to have the pilot today. Today is a pilot which is going to pave the way for what's going to be announced in next November, which is the establishment of Aspar Institute for Future Studies. And this is under the patronage of Aspar Forum, and this is one of our important initiatives. Today, this year, we would be launching a number of initiatives. The surveillance of Aspar for developmental foreseeing or futuristic studies, and the Saudi network of social entrepreneurs. Well, we in next September are going to establish Aspar Institute for the Future. I would like to thank all the colleagues who have helped in conducting this meeting. I would like to thank the scholars who are here with us, who are going to learn from them. I hope that you will find this useful meeting. All due thanks to everyone. Peace be upon you.
From that on, let me proceed with the next our next speaker, which is it's the director for the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies. It's Professor Ziauddin Sardar, who is, in my opinion, needs no introduction, but allow me briefly to introduce him. Professor Ziauddin is a Pakistani who has grown up in Hackney, East London. Throughout his career, he had the chance to experience many fields. He's a former professor of law and society in Middlesex University in London. He's a writer who has published over 50 books, and many of them, like The Future of Muslim Civilization in 1979, The Islamic Futures, The Shape of Ideas to Come in 1985, Mecca, The Sacred City, and many more. In various topics, including the international bestseller in 2002, Why Do People Hate America? He's also a broadcaster and a cultural critic, and he has worked as a science journalist for Nature Journal and New Scientist magazine. Professor, the floor is yours. Can you hear us?
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here amongst you, even though it's not a physical thing, it's more of on a kind of virtual meeting, and it's so good to see so many people. 117 participants so far, and I suspect there are many more on Facebook and other devices. It is not just important for us to study the future, but we also need to understand the present. It is not just that the future is changing, because the nature of change itself is changing, but the present is changing as well. So in my presentation later on, I'm going to be talking about post-normal times, which is a new theory that we have developed over the last 10 years about how the present is changing, and therefore to understand the changing future, we need to appreciate how the present itself is changing. So at this moment, all I'm going to say is that I'm going to speak after Shamimia and Jody have spoken. And so my presentation will be much longer, and it will be concentrated on what has been happening over the last few years. And this is why it's called What Just Happened. And essentially, me, myself, Jody, and many of our colleagues who've been working in future studies have for a long time thought that our work was not actually producing the kind of results that we wanted. And many people were not kind of satisfied with various methodologies of future studies. And that forced us to look at the present. And it is only through looking at the present and what's happening in the present and researching the present, we actually discovered that the nature of change itself is changing. It's not just that change is, conventionally, the futurists always believe that change is changing. In fact, we know that change has been accelerating for the last 20, 30 years. But now what we actually realize that it's not just change is accelerating, but during that acceleration, the nature of change itself is changing. And that's going to be the kind of the focus of my presentation. So I leave it at that, and we can go on to Shamimia to talk about Islam and future studies.
So we will pass on for Professor Shamim. Shamimia, and I'm sorry if I misspelled your name, but he's a senior lecturer at the School of Education, University of Huddersfield. He's a sociologist and an expert on youth and identity. His research is concerned with the framing of race, religion, and public policy, and he's promoting future literacy amongst young people. His books include Muslim Schooling and the Question of Self-Segregation, and Muslims and the Questions of Security, Trojan Horse, Prevent, and Racialized Politics. Eventually, he has over 20 years old experience of voluntary work with youth, community development, and interfaith work in Oldham, England. He worked as a senior policy advisor and a youth worker for Oldham Council for many years. Again, I'm sorry if I misspelled your name. The floor is yours again.
Oh, thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa'hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm assuming that everybody can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up or some indication as to that the audio is working well. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so I planned a presentation. So if you bear with me for 1 second, I will share my screen. Okay. Is that okay? Everybody can see the screen? Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Shamim, you need to put it in full screen mode.
I certainly do. Yes. Thank you, Jody. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking here. I've learned a great deal about your organization and the type of work that you are currently doing, and also the type of work that you are intending to do. So I wish you all the best with that. Today's short presentation this will only last for about 40 minutes. I'm hoping to actually give some space for people to ask questions and to generate some discussions. So it's not going to be a long presentation. And essentially it revolves around three particular arguments for Islamic futures. And here I think the emphasis is on the plural. It's not necessarily an Islamic future that we want to be creating or discussing about, but rather it's in the plural, Islamic futures. And I think this is quite important really, because if you pick up any core texts on the history of Islam, you take the 3-volume Venture of Islam by Marshall Hodgson, one of the things that you pick up quite early is this idea of Islam as the cultural imperative. That's to say that throughout history, one of the success and celebratory points about Islamic history is that it's created a diverse cultural modes, if you like, whether it be from Africa, from South Asia to the Middle East, or even North Africa. And I think that's one of the key essences, the key beauties of Islam, that it has the ability to actually create societies which are diverse and which are plural. And I think it's within this spirit, if you like, that we are trying to embark upon a discussion around the plurality of futures, and not necessarily the future in a singular kind of Western European normative fashion, if you like. So that's some reflections upon the actual title itself. Now, just to quickly move on, I know that Professor Ziad Sardar has a much lengthier presentation on the aspects of post-normal times, post-normal policy, and how that connects with the future studies. So I will skip this slide so that I don't necessarily overlap anything that's going to be covered later on. Suffices to say that this idea that we're trying to develop at the CVPVS is grounded upon a empirical and hard science. It's not something that it's not a knowledge production that is actually generated from websites, etc. But rather it's grounded upon some serious empirical research that the likes of Professor Ziad Sardar, Jody, and various other colleagues have spent and devoted their entire lives to it. So that's just to flag things up, really, to say that this is years of research that has actually gone into actually developing this this science. And obviously this is, if you want to actually go and download some free material, please feel free to do that in your own time. Okay, so the big question is this: why bother with the future? Now, I mean, at this point, I'd like to actually put a footnote and to say that it's quite sad in many respects that we have to have a set presentation drawing upon the ontological and epistemological heritage of Islam that talks about the idea of future. In fact, in various other traditions, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, etc., there isn't a great deal of convincing that's actually required. And I think there is something there about the theology, if you like, that we need to perhaps discuss and unpick, so that we can actually, convince people on this journey of future studies. But let's start off with this question about why bother with the future, especially when future doesn't exist. I mean, we talk about the future, we write about the future, we create movies about the future, but essentially future doesn't actually exist. Because when we arrive at the future as a destination, then that point has already shifted, if you like. Especially also that, when we talk about the history or the present, I mean, I'm trained in the field of sociology, so, it's very much of the presence. The future doesn't necessarily have any, have any facts. And in many respects, this has been the problem, really, because a number of people have actually articulated, wrongly so in my opinion, is that this particular domain of the future actually is the domain of the divine, because you can't necessarily read the mind of the divine, if you like. And I think this discussion isn't necessarily new. It goes back all the way back to, when we talk about the Asharite theology and Mu'tazilite, there's a whole body of literature that basically underpins this, this idea of can we basically make sense of, of the future. And it is within this spirit, really, that we're talking about trying to generate a debate and a discussion around the merits, the Islamic, a theological, imperative, if you like, of looking at the future, and it's this within the spirit that we're trying to kind of actually look at the future, through the eyes of the text and also the history, but also in a way that we're allowed to reread the text, that allows the text to actually speak to the actual kind of the actual present, if you like. So these are three reasons or three arguments why we feel that future is of utmost importance. And the first is that the study and the exploration of the future is an imperative within Islam, despite the fact that we have a number of televangelists telling us the contrary. So the first argument, if you like, we're trying to focus on the actual epistemological framework that underpins the essence of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadith literature. So that's basically the first domain, if you like, or the first argument, is to study and explore what these particular texts have to say about the future within Islam. So if we start off with the first and perhaps the most important aspect is what does the Quran have to say? Now, we know, the famous Quranic verse that everybody likes to kind of share, especially during the Friday in the Minbar, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, Allah does not change the conditions of the individual until, he or she changes it first. So that's perhaps a kind of a more kind of a generic verse, if you like, that can be read within the aspect of, of creating or understanding of the idea of the future. Or as Professor Zia Sada has mentioned in one of his kind of articles, is this idea of developing a future consciousness. So we read these verses in relation to developing a future consciousness. So this is the first one. I mean, I don't necessarily have to read it in Arabic because I know most we're actually dealing with an Arabic kind of speaking audience. But this is a verse taken from Surah Hashr. Or you who believe, be mindful of God and let every soul consider carefully what sends ahead for tomorrow. Now, if we move on to the second verse, if you like, and this is Surah Al-Araf, the happy future belongs to those who are mindful. And by mindful, we basically can read different ways in which we can actually interpret the idea of mindful, being aware or to have a consciousness. Now, as Professor Ziasada says, is this idea of developing a sense of awareness of the future. Now, this is another a verse from the Quran, Surah Hud, in which Allah says, the future belongs to those who are aware. So, once again, to say that the element of future is independent of the actual text is something that needs some kind of interpretation, if you like. So these are perhaps some of the Quranic verses, and I'm sure if we open this discussion here, you will have your own experts of the text here that perhaps can share other verses of the Quran. But that's not an exhaustive list, but rather a list just to give you an indication. Text is concerned and the way in which the text speaks to this idea of developing a future consciousness. And we can do that with the with hadith literature as well. And this is one of I know it's Jodi's favorite hadith. He's mentioned this a number of times. Is this idea of trusting in Allah, but tying your tying your camel, taking your own responsibility, if you like, of your own changes, and relying, leaving everything else to kind of Allah. So it's not necessarily a hadith that basically speaks to this idea of determinism, but rather, it's a constructivist kind of element that basically speaks to this idea of human beings taking responsibility for your own changes. This is slightly more a longer hadith, but if you just bear with me, with your patience, and this is the Prophet ﷺ says, at the time of big complexities will come. What is the solution in these times? Asked one of the companions, and the Prophet ﷺ replied by saying, God's book that tells you what is in front of you and what was before you, replied the Prophet. So one way that we can actually, understand what is in front of you is not necessarily the current context, but rather, the future as it stands, if you like. This is another hadith. The in-depth understanding and insight of the people of wisdom and knowledge of what is coming in the future will enable them almost to be prophets. So that's not necessarily saying, I don't want to get myself into trouble, really. It's not necessarily saying you will be prophets, but rather it's basically saying that you will have, the skill sets, the ability to actually kind of have this in-depth understanding and insight of people of wisdom. And here, I mean, it's really important for us to separate this idea of wisdom and knowledge. These are completely, two separate entities. But also, I mean, the thing that I find rather fascinating is this notion of having an in-depth understanding, and not necessarily a superficial understanding, really, but rather something which is, which has substance. It's an in-depth understanding of the presence, but also an in-depth understanding of the future, of futures as we try to kind of develop, if you like. Previous account of the hadith in relation to this, there are some kind of some parallels, if you like, because the previous hadith talked about this idea of developing an understanding, insight, in-depth understanding based upon wisdom and knowledge. But this basically talks about the destruction of the of the community, and this will come by ignorance and limited vision. I know for a fact that Professor Zaid and Sadar will be covering some of these aspects in his presentation, but there's this body of literature that's actually out there that's actually been produced by by us, and in particular this particular book here, the Postnormal Times Reader. It's available, I think, from our website. But that's it just goes to show that it's not based upon a limited vision. This idea of the futures that we are talking about, especially within this, within this a setting, has come as a result of in-depth understanding and and insight. Okay, so that leaves us to the final hadith, and once again, this is a famous hadith in which that really speaks passionately about optimism, if you like, and not necessarily developing a pessimistic kind of understanding or predeterministic kind of understanding of the future. And that basically says, if you think that the world will end tomorrow and you have a seed, plant it. And the thing that we know about planting is that it takes a great deal of care. You have to water it. You have to give it time. So the idea of growing a tree, planting a tree, as using that as a metaphor, if you like, of our own kind of understanding of of the future is I think it's is very, very crucial. So that's basically, we've looked at the Quran, we've looked at the Hadith, and really quickly, I just want to basically flag up a number of episodes within the Seerah literature that basically talks about, of this notion of future consciousness. So these are historical episodes, and when you read these historical episodes, you can basically quite clearly glean the fact that the Prophet ﷺ had himself grounded in a very future orientated kind of manner, if you like. Take one example of the of the Hijra.
La cuenta online BBVA no te pide nada. Cero condiciones, cero comisiones, ni no.
So if you take the Hijra as one example, it took a great deal of planning, if you like. Many years of planning. If you pick up one of the oldest kind of the Seerah literature of Ibn Ishaq, I know there's a very decent translation of it available, in the English language by Alfred William. So when you read the Seerah, you basically note that the Hijra was a planning, if you like, of future planning. Because otherwise that wouldn't have basically taken shape. So that's one example of the Hijra, and time doesn't actually allow us, but we could have actually gone into great detail about looking at the other examples. The examples of Constitution of the Medina, the Hudaybiyah Treaty, or the Battle of Badr, or the trenches. I mean, there's been a number of books within the Western English language on the military kind of tactics underpinned by the Badr and the Battle of Trenches. I know there's been a significant interest within the Constitution of Medina and how forward-thinking that basically was, especially when it comes to the understanding of the Ummah. It wasn't necessarily a very restrictive category, but rather it was a very inclusive category. And I just finished reading the PhD thesis that I'm going to be examining at the University of Leeds in September, and it was basically looking at the Constitution of Medina within the context of the British values discourse. So it's really interesting, really, how those ancient texts, if you like, that are very kind of central to our kind of worldview in areas that have high concentration of Muslim communities. So that's obviously going to have a profound impact. But also, if we look at this a graph that's both of them are published by the United Nations Environment Programme, and this basically deals with these water stress kind of indicators in major basin. And once again, if you look at the kind of geographical scope, it doesn't take a rocket science to actually figure out that the key areas that are having a profound impact is countries that have high concentration of Muslim communities, if you like. Okay. projected temperature levels. Now we've seen this a discussion in most recently, if you like, with Canada and also the United States. So although this deals with the projected temperature changes, we know that global temperatures have kind of gone through the roof, and it's happening right in front of our eyes, if you like. So once again, for those people who follow the news and read the journals, will know that this is it's an issue not necessarily as a projection, but rather something that is basically happening as we speak. So what are the consequences arising from this? So this is the big question. Now the big question is that many Muslims can be among the people that are going to be climate refugees. So that's the key essence, if you like. So we've got a huge environmental and a climate catastrophe, but the communities that are going to disproportionately have an impact are going to be Muslim communities, if you like. So that's something which is kind of scary, if you like, because it's going to have a huge impact as far as kind of climate refugees. And from this, statistics, we basically find that 1 out of every 3 refugee, I mean, this is quite staggering, 1 out of every 3 refugees, is a Muslim. So that's a huge, profound kind of impact, if you like, on climate kind of impact and its kind of effects, if you like, on climate refugees. So we can also find that as we understand the changes of society, if you look at the kind of the breakdown of the age cohort throughout the world, the thing that we basically note quite glaringly, and this has been picked up by a number of a number of reports, a number of journals, if you like, is we're dealing with a very young population. We're dealing with a very young population of Muslims. There are 529.3 million people between the ages of 0 to 14. I mean, that's a staggering number, if you like. And those communities are going to, they're not necessarily, going to, sit there and, and take, what's been actually given to them. So that age cohort is going to have, a profound impact in the demands that they basically make and the claim that they actually make, but also how they kind of how they read the the normative ways of politics, if you like. Now, if you also look at the impacts of that particular cohort group on Europe, within the areas that I was born in. I was born in the UK, but this I've seen how this has actually kind of changed over the years. And one of the things is that the climate refugees has had a huge kind of impact, not only climate refugees, but also people fleeing from political kind of hot points, if you like, from whether it be Iran, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be Libya, etc. And that's having a huge impact on on the politics of the UK. I'm just currently reviewing a book by Robert Ford, Professor Robert Ford, on the title of his book is Brexit Land. And that's exactly what he's basically talking about, is that since the 90s, there's been a huge transformation in the way in which European societies and European communities have existed. It's completely transformed the face of certain communities, and that's had a profound impact on the rise of the far right, but also what he basically terms liberal conservatives. So I guess it's having a profound impact on, on the West as well. And that perhaps is going to kind of, increase rapidly, especially if we look at the corruption kind of index, and, not necessarily naming any particular, nations, but, we can see exactly where those kind of corruption kind of indexes, are at their peak, if you like, in the same way that we can actually see the literacy rates. I mean, obviously, this is an area of my kind of interest, if you like, education, sociology of education, and this is, this is the same thing. It's very, very important to have, actually develop a highly literate, literate societies, because obviously there is a strong correlation between, if you look at creativity indexes, you look at corruption indexes, all of those aspects are predicated upon, rates of literacy. So if we take everything together, everything that we've basically talked about together, and we can basically summarize it in this particular quotation. And this quotation is from, the late Malcolm X, in which he beautifully articulated that the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. So I don't necessarily think it needs any elaboration, but I mean, if we fail to actually prepare for our own future, whether it be individual or collective, then, it's going to have, profound consequences. And, thankfully, alhamdulillah, there's individuals who have devoted their lives, in this area of study, that at least it gives us kind of hope and, hope and optimism. On which point I will say, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for listening, and more information can be found on our website.
Thank you so much for this, Professor Shamim. This was actually very structured, and I think it was very important for every person of us that must be considering. Like, these things are really important for everyone of us to be considering. Well, for now, we will have a break for 15 minutes and continue with Professor Jordi. And for all the questions and comments, I would like to ask everybody to kindly write them down or note them for the question session in the end of today's program. See you at 6:15.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. There is 1 minute left. Let's just keep people coming in. Now I will introduce you. Jordi, I think you will need to be forgiving me for misspelling so many names in your area. So
No, it's fine. There's no problem.
yeah, Spain is a bit different.
I've been
than
called
English
worse
in the end.
names.
Oh, well, I can see that. All right. So welcome back, everybody. Now it's Professor Jordi's session. Jordi Serra is actually the Deputy Director with the coordination of the Center. Oh, sorry, the Deputy Director for the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies in Barcelona office. He's a futurist with a career of 40 years researching, studying, teaching, assessing, writing about change and future studies. He's also the Associate Professor at the Communication and International Relations Faculty of Blanquera. I think it's right. Hopefully.
Blanquerna.
The Blanquera University, where he teaches postnormal time theory and foresight, and acts as the academic director of the Social Economy Observatory. He has published numerous papers and books in English, Spanish, and Catalan, has many articles in newspaper and magazine. Currently, he is one of the editorial board of Future magazine as well. The floor is yours. Here you go.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here with all of you. So I will start by sharing my screen. For some reason. Okay. I cannot see what I'm trying to share. Interesting. Give me a second. Let's give it another try. Okay. I'm sorry, something unexpected is happening. Let's see if I can. Now, finally. Sorry for the unexpected technical problem. So I will
Before you start, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We will have a 30-minute session now, 30 to 35 minutes. And from that on, we will have another break for 15 minutes for the prayer. And we will continue with Professor Ziadin. Just wanted to mention for everyone to know now. The floor is open. Sorry for interrupting.
Excellent. Thank you, Homam. So what after first presentation by Dr. Shamim Mia, I will introduce the idea of futures studies as a way to improve our understanding of the future. And you see, let's start with giving you a reason why is it important to think about the future, beyond the fact of the particularities of Muslim civilization, as Dr. Mia has explained. And I will do it by sharing with you an example about my city. I am in Barcelona, raised and born. This is a map of how Barcelona looked by 1850. At that time, it was still the middle-aged city. As you can see, there were still walls around the city. It had suffered a very long siege the previous century. As a result of that, it lost an entire quarter to build a new fortress. But the problem is that the walls were preventing the city from growing. So let's think that there were 187,000 people literally packed inside the walls. So there was a lot of pressure to tear down the walls and open the city. So the local council made a public contest to do it. And this is the project that won. So you can see the old city in this darker green. The expansion would be this orange color area. And these other green parts were existing villages nearby the city. And you see this one on top of Barcelona, if you can read it, it's called Gracia. It was where all the rich people were already going for holidays and for summer. So it was mostly a real estate operation. But you see, if you look at this map, being it like a radial design, it was clear that it would have got congested very soon. Some people saw it and went to Madrid trying to stop this project. The person that did it was called Ildefons Cerdà. This is the project he designed. And luckily, it was the project that finally took place. Ildefons Cerdà, unlike the other architect, Rovira, realized that all Barcelona was becoming a problem in several regards. So for instance, Cerdà was very sensitive to the social hygiene movement, and he understood that the way you build a city has a great weight in the well-being, in the promotion of its citizens, not just the rich one, all citizens. So he designed a very, let's say, homogeneous, egalitarian city with lots of space, with open streets, because that would allow for a healthier life, and also it would make it easier to implement one of the top technologies at the moment, telegraph, because he realized that communications would be essential for a modern city. So the thing is that Cerdà managed to vision, to imbue, to design a city for the future. And he was so good, his genius was so high, that thanks to this plan, the Barcelona I live today is still pretty much livable. It has survived the arrival of cars, which have, let's say, made lives in cities very hard in many places. And it is right now that we are beginning to think of a Barcelona for the next century, a greener Barcelona, maybe without cars. So in this case, this is a very good example of someone that decided to plan, taking into account future needs, future conditions, that was able to imagine what could be the life of the people in that future Barcelona he was envisioning. This is a success story. This is a failure story. If you have been following the news this summer, you may have heard that Canada has suffered a heat wave like never before had been experienced. We are talking of the country that is the second coldest country on Earth. And this summer, they have experienced temperatures of almost 50 centigrade degrees, which is crazy. So this means that all these warnings we have been hearing in the last decades about climate change, those warnings that we did not pay a lot of attention to it, those warnings that we didn't take into account, now are becoming a new reality. So it is important, it is essential to take into account the future effects, the future consequences, the future developments, because the present is just a passing moment. So when we do not take the future into account, things like this happen. We get into serious struggle. Right now, I will make you first introduction to the disciplines that is mostly called future studies, but you may find actually the first speech by Professor Fahad, if I say rightly, he has already mentioned a few of them: foresight, futurology, futuristics, la prospective, strategic management. Well, you can read them. All these activities have in common this interest in trying to understand what may happen and what can we do about it. And here, there's a lot of techniques, methods that can be used to improve our knowledge about the future. During all this presentation, I will refer to all this as futures, futures for short. So I will not say futures meaning multiple futures, but the discipline of future studies. But what it is, future studies? You see, one of the things of being a futurist is that, at least in my country, nobody has a clue of what it is. So I'm constantly answering the question, what it is that you do. So first of all, I would engage in long explanations. After a while, I realized that many people were just trying to be polite with me. So I came up with this rather short definition. Futures is the discipline that studies the future so we can understand it and influence it. The thing is that, short as it is, this definition provides me with all the elements to expand for a much interested, let's say, audience. So for instance, when I say discipline, I mean that future studies is a social science. So this is not one of these esoteric arts like tarot, like numerology, like astronomy. No, we use the same principles as any other social science. We try to find evidence by research. We try to operate them, process them with rigor. We are public, so everything we use, it's known, it can be learned. It's not that we are the sons of a gifted saga or that we were abducted at some point by some aliens. It's like any other discipline that studies the future. This future sometimes has become a little bit problematic because some people understand that when we say that we study the future is our object. And as Shamim has already said, the future doesn't exist. So how come there can be a science with an object that doesn't exist? That would mean that we are not a science. But the truth is that we are not really studying the future as an entity. We are trying to learn things about things that may happen in the future. So sometimes we study the future of the economy of a country, of a region. Sometimes we focus on education. Sometimes we just try to learn more about society evolution. These are the objects. The future is just the context in which they will take place. It's a little bit like history. History doesn't study the past because the past, as the name indicates, it's already gone. It's past. We study what it's left from the past. Books, remains, archives, files, and that's why we are constantly reassessing and trying to get a better understanding of what has happened. In this regard, history and future studies would be very, very similar. So we can understand it. This is the central part of this definition. We want to generate knowledge about the future. So we are not interested in just anticipating or predicting. I will go back to predictions in a while. What may happen next? What we are looking for, what we are striving for, is to be able to explain why and how they may happen. This is the difference. We are trying to comprehend. We are trying to be certain of the mechanisms that may cause that one future among all the future possibilities is the one that takes place. And this is essential for us because, as the last part emphasized, our ultimate goal is to be able to influence, if we are lucky, shape the future. After all, if we are studying about the future of a place and we discover there's an incoming danger, we will do our best to prevent it. If we see an opportunity, we will also do the best we can to seize it. So that's why the what will happen is not so important for us, because it may turn out that this what may happen is negative. And then we will use this knowledge about the how and the why to work against it, to prevent it. So this is in a nutshell what we do when we do futures. Let's try to develop a couple of important concepts for us. So for instance, predictions. If I say something like tomorrow it will rain, this is a prediction. And you see, when I say something like this, the implication is that the only thing we can expect is that tomorrow it rains, maybe not a lot, maybe cats and dogs. For us, a prediction has two very important implications. The first of all is notice that when I say tomorrow it will rain, I don't allow for any other possible happening. So basically, I'm telling you that the future is singular. There's only one possibility in the future. Not only that, the second assumption is that this future is somehow predetermined. And that's why I'm able to foretell him. I'm able to predict this. But if the future is singular and it's predetermined, then why bother doing future studies? As the song says, que será, será. Whatever will be, will be. Let's accept it and try to live happily with it. For us, a prediction is a very disempowering tool. We don't do predictions, and we do not trust anyone talking about predictions unless we are talking about hard natural science predictions, like water will boil at 100 degrees. We use another tool. We use forecasts. And instead of saying there's an 80% chance that tomorrow it will rain, we say there's an 80% chance that tomorrow it rains. Of course, if someone tells me that, I will get an umbrella, because I don't know about you, but if all my choices in life would be 8 over 10, that would make my life a lot easier. But the thing is that there's only 80% chances that it rains. So yes, the most likely outcome is that it rains, but that other 20% means that maybe it just stays cloudy. Maybe it will be a typical London gray day, but maybe it even after a while, the sun shines and we have a nice day. So the very first implication is that when we use forecast, what we do is we allow the future to be plural, because there's no longer just one possibility, there are more than one. It's open, because we are not given a closed package. We are told that there's that probability of rain, and then it's up to us to decide what we do, if we go out with an umbrella, if we stay home, if we do whatever. And it can also be participatory, because we can discuss about it. We can decide jointly. And for us, this is absolutely essential. Because if the future is single, then human agency is irrelevant. And at least us at the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies, we are in the business of future studies to help people to be able, if not to take decisions about the future, at least, at the very, very least, to have a saying in their own future. This is about empowering people about the future. And this is why we are so happy that we are given this opportunity to reach new audiences with this presentation. But let's keep one thing straight. When we are talking about the future, we are talking about time and change. A lot about the evolution of human population on Earth. First of all, we really need to realize that it took 200,000 years for humanity to reach the first billion, to be 1,000 million people on Earth. It is estimated that it was around 1810. We don't know it for sure, but it's probably quite right estimation. So in the first 200,000 years of our history, there were not so many humans on Earth. But then in the following 200 years, we went from 1 to 7 billion. And if things go carry on like that, we may be between 9 and 10 by 2050. So this gives us very relevant information about the degree of change and the speed of change. This is data that we can use when we make our research, when we make our analysis to take better decisions about the future. The kind of analysis that Ildefons Cerdà did in Barcelona. He understood that once the walls would be torn down, the city would grow fast and high. And this is the kind of analysis we need to engage. Another example, let's consider the evolution in people living in cities and in the country in rural areas. In the beginning of the 20th century, only 20% of population live in cities. Right now, we have already surpassed 50%. We are almost 60% of the world's population right now lives in city. And it is estimated that by 2050, 70% will live in cities. Again, very relevant information, because the ecological fingerprint of living in a city or living in a rural area is totally different. The ecological cost of these huge mega cities we have today is far more expensive than the same amount of people distributed in medium or smaller villages. Again, information that we need to take into account. Because as I was saying at the beginning, the situation in the planet is telling us that we cannot take for granted that we will be able to live the same way we have been living for centuries. Which methods can we use to improve our comprehension of the future? I will not get into detailed explanation of every method. I will just give you broad classifications. The first approach is when we use the information we have in the present to try to learn more about the future. So the most obvious example would be trends. Trends is essentially time series. So data we have up to present, and we use that to extrapolate the future. These and the following trends are from our project, the Atlas of Postnormal Time. I've already shared the link before in the chat. And by looking at this, we learn a lot. So for instance, we realize that the energy that we have used for the longest time has been biomass. Only at the middle of 20th century, we began to be heavily reliant on oil. And despite renewables are, let's say, the hope for the future, they are still small. They are not very significant at the global level. If we analyze the consumption of primary energy per capita, considering different regions, we can see that the problem is still North America. Despite they don't have quite as much population as Asia, for instance, they consume a lot of energy. So if you look at the total consumption, of course, Asia consumes more energy, But when you divide this consumption by people, the problem is North America. Again, information that we need to take into account in order to have a better understanding of the future. These methods, we call them flashlight, because it's like using a flashlight to get into a dark room. You know very little of the room, so you use the flashlight from your standpoint, trying to see what's ahead of you. And precisely like a flashlight, if you are focusing to the ground, you may miss an obstacle in the high and hit your head. And if you look too high, you may miss an obstacle in the floor and stumble. So these methods can give us a lot of information, but they cannot give us all the information. To complement, there's another approach. So we try to use whatever we already know about the future to find our way there. So there's a method that we call the future wheel. So what we do is we use a totally different approach. So for instance, what would happen in Barcelona if all the cars are removed and substituted by electric self-driving cars? So this is not a future fact per se, but we can consider the implications of having these kind of cars in the city. So then the green spots would be the direct consequences. Maybe we would need to change the transit law. We will need to establish new rules. Maybe we would need to make some physical changes in some city streets, so the cars could park and recharge. Maybe people would be forced to adopt new measures. And then we can consider what kind of consequences would have these things. Maybe we would have to need the way we have insurance when travel. Maybe we would need to rethink the idea of public or mass transport versus private or individual transport, so on, so forth. You may say, is this real data? Not in the sense of having something and knowing for sure that it weighs 30 kilos, but it's good enough information for us to take decisions in the present. There's another method, it's called incasting. Incasting starts with 4 archetypes of the future. So studying what people think about the future, we discovered there are 4 main types. The first one is we will carry on growing. So it's basically the capitalistic modern ideal of the future, the more, the better. Lately, we are having more and more images of the future about collapse. At the end of the past century, it was the fear of Cold War and the nuclear winter. Now it's more ecological and ecological collapse. And the pandemics has already shown us how vulnerable we are. There are other images that focus on adopting strong principles. No, the future is going to be okay if all of us become vegetarian and stop eating any kind of meat, of red meat, and we stop using plastics, these kind of things. And finally, images of transformation. No, the future is technological, because we will be able to merge with machines. We all will be cyborgs with artificial intelligence capacities, and we will be able to design future images. So you can use, sometimes you can use these archetypes to find ways into the future. Again, it's not hard evidence in the sense of natural science, but it's good enough information for us to take decisions in the present. And we call these methods lighthouse, because it's like having a lighthouse on the coast. It gives ships a signal that there's land there, but it doesn't tell them if there are rocks or if there may be any other language. It's just a reference that ships need to develop. There are other classifications, of course. So for instance, quantitative versus qualitative. If you have quantitative data, you can do a trend. If you don't have quantitative data, you have to find alternatives with more qualitative methods like Delphis, interviews, etc. In some cases, you just use methods that will be done by highly trained expert people, small group of trained futurists. Sometimes you engage in big participatory processes to let everybody have a say into the future. And I will not really tell you how to apply future studies. I will just give you some basic principles. First of all, something we often do wrong is we let the present dictate how the future should be. So we consider the conditions of the present and we think that the future is going to be more or less like the present. Do the opposite. How would we would like the future to be, and then take the decisions in the present that can take us closer to that future. If we know the demands, the implications, the impact of certain future development, then we need to take them into account. If you want to have a higher literacy in a place, you need to be sure to develop an educative structure capable of providing services to a larger population, so on and so forth. We must explore multiple and alternative futures, because many times what it ends up happening is something that before was considered unlikely, sometimes even impossible. Now, honestly, how many of you were considering at the beginning of 2019 that we would spend a year like this, many of us closed indoors and barely not getting out? It was highly unlikely. So we need to consider different possibilities. And we must strive for pluralism. Do not approach the future within only one discipline, within only one theory, within only one discipline. Let's try to add different perspectives, different theories, different disciplines. Let us have the more diverse and richer image of the future that we can possibly conceive. And of course, the future is also the result of people preferences, of people strategy, of people action. Over and over, we are told that this technology will succeed, this technology is so wonderful. No technology has ever been successful because of its inherent internal qualities. It has always been the socio-cultural context. Some technologies succeed because they arrive at the right time and at the right context. So we know General Motors did a very good electric car in the 80s, but it was too early then. So that possibility was killed. It was a very good electrical car. It is now that the time is right for electrical cars to be successful. And if you only learn one thing from all the things I've been saying, please let it be this. Always question stereotypes. Never accept a common idea for a fact when thinking about the future. If someone tells you that your idea about the future is wrong, always reply, why not? Why do you think my idea is wrong? Why it could not be like I say? Why are you so convinced that the future is going to be like this or like that? Because many times what lies behind a stereotype is a prejudice. It's like at the beginning of future studies, where the first futurists were convinced that for other countries and nations to prosper, they had to follow the Western approach, industrialized, post-industrialized. That is just how it happened in the West. It doesn't have to be the same way everywhere. Actually, for so many places, it would be much better, so much better to be in other ways. So always question stereotypes. So I wanted to make it shorter to leave more time for Professor Zia's last intervention. Homam, I don't know if you would like to go straight to the break, or if you want to give some first time for questions and answers.
No, the questions and the comments will be further taken in the end of the program.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jordi, for this smooth introduction for the importance of future studies and what essentially is future studies. I can say that this is a very relatable situation as humans who are trying to consider and should be figuring a better tomorrow for a better today. Thank you so much, Jordi, and we will be having our break and we will be back with you in 15 minutes, yeah, as I said. So, yeah.
So, in
5 past.
Yeah, past 5, exactly.
Okay, so 5 past 7 your time, okay?
All right. So we will continue with Professor Ziadin after that. See you all.
Okay. Bye then.
Yeah, we are back in time, but there's still 2 minutes. I think you are excited. And that's very good, actually. Professor, do you want to share your screen from now?
I can do that.
Yeah. Great. 1 more minute and I will give you the floor. All right, Professor.
Yeah, when you're ready.
The floor is yours. Yeah.
Is everybody there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Professor Ziauddin will be, as he introduced like before Shamim and before Jordi, that he will be explaining us today and speaking about what just happened as a concept and as a concept of postnormal times. And yeah, as I introduced him, he is very rich to be introduced anyways. So the floor is yours, Professor. Here you go.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. So most futures work involves forecasting. And normally what is done is that people take the present.
Excuse me, Zia. Remember the full screen mode.
Full screen mode, it is the full screen mode.
No, it is not.
It is not, sorry. So where do we go to?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Okay.
There you go.
Sorry. Yeah. All right. Apologies for that. Apologies for that. We always have these problems. And Shamim had some problems as well. So there we are. Yes, as I was saying, most futures work is about forecasting. I mean, most futurists do forecasting. Although we ourselves don't do so much forecasting, but a lot of futurists do forecasting. And forecasting, whatever method you use for forecasting, it actually involves taking the present and extending the present into the future. That's essentially what it is. Now, suppose that the present itself is changing. I mean, the normal assumption is that you take something from that is very solid and more or less fixed, and you extend it to the future, which is changing and dynamic, and you try to discover and explore and try to understand what potential and possibilities lie in the future. But suppose the present itself is not static. The present itself is changing. In the 90s, I was editor of Futures, which is the primary journal in the field of future studies. I was editor of Futures for 13 years. And as editor of Futures, I noticed that lots and lots of papers were emerging that we were publishing, which were actually questioning the notion of the present and how the present itself is not static, and all sorts of things are happening. So what I'm going to do is to take you through some of the recent developments that have taken place over the last less than 10 years. And some very recent, to show how, in fact, we cannot rely on we cannot see the present simply as a static phenomena, but itself is a changing phenomena. So let's begin with 2016, that in 2016, the Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year was post-truth. Now, these words of the years are quite important because a lot of research is done to find out what is the main dominant theme, what is the word that everybody is using, throughout the globe. And the post-truth suggests that we are in a period which is beyond truth, where truth doesn't really matter that much. Now, this is very strange because since the time of Greek civilization, we have taken truth to be absolute. Throughout Muslim civilization, Muslim al-haq, haq, truth is absolute, is one, is, we don't kind of dispute the truth. But at least since 2016, if the Oxford Dictionary is to be believed, truth is not as important as it used to be. 2 years later, the Oxford Word of the Year was toxic. That the global culture itself has become toxic, like poisonous, right? People are spewing poisons over each other, either through social media or through other means or conventional media, and everything is becoming toxic. Then, of course, we had Brexit in Britain, which caused a lot of problems, not just for Britain, but also for Europe, because here we had a European Union that was supposed to be a community, which you belong to that community. And in fact, the European Union never conceived of the idea that some members would actually leave the community, right? So it became a very strange phenomena. And the so-called divorce from the European Union took 4 years to kind of undertake. And even now, of course, it's not complete. All sorts of complications and all sorts of problems have risen, both for Brexit, that means both for Britain and for the European Union. So here's something that was not possibly seen, that something that would happen, and it is happening in the present, and it's causing a lot of kind of perturbation in the present itself. Then, of course, we had two unthinkable things. One, we had Donald Trump. I suppose we can easily say that he actually did not believe in truth of any kind. Even now, the simple truth that he lost the election is not accepted by him. In the American television networks refer to it as the great lie. And then we had Boris Johnson, who in fact is known for lying, right? Yet is very popular and accepted for the people in general do not care whether Boris Johnson is lying or not, right? He is a very popular leader. His party won huge majority in the last election. There's so many recorded evidence of him lying. Even he got fired from one newspapers for fabricating stories that were not true, and so on and so forth. Yet that does not matter, right? The truth has become, if you like, quite irrelevant. And other things are happening as well, other developments in terms of technology. So just watch this video.
Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of sheep explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents.
So we have some frightening technology emerging. This is a real product that he's trying to sell. Notice that it is based on facial recognition. And we also know that facial recognition played a great part in China. In fact, it plays a great part in China to this day. That the cameras everywhere. I mean, virtually all of China is under surveillance, and facial recognition is kind of ubiquitous everywhere. And we also know that it has been used against the Uyghur people. And there's considerable amount of evidence to suggest that culture genocide is being perpetuated amongst against the Uyghur people. Their religion is
Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you please just press F5 to have a full screen for the people to see better?
Sorry. Oh, screen again. Oh, went back.
Yes, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Back. Oh dear. What happened? Oh.
You're pressing the book. To the right, you see the screen.
Yeah, but I'm not getting anything. Oh, bugger.
You can press F5.
No, I'm not getting anything.
It will help you. If you have the F5 button, it will help you to have a full screen.
Not press the book, but the one after that. Oh.
Right.
The video is seen. Everybody saw the video, or shall I do it again?
Yeah, I think everyone, it was clear for everybody. Yes.
So I was saying that about facial recognition, and facial recognition has been used extensively against the Uyghur people in China, where their religion is suppressed. In fact, they're forced to abandon their religion, their culture, their history, and essentially accept Han identity. You know, it's basically an exercise in Han supremacy. Right? Then there's artificial intelligence, which is all over the place. Almost every device you have at home, in your pocket, uses some kind of artificial intelligence. And now we know from numerous studies that a great deal of artificial intelligence is actually racially biased. It is particularly racially biased against Muslims, by the way, I would argue. And in fact, there is a tremendous amount of evidence to show that. And not just that, but we can now also see that some sort of artificial life is on its way. Recent breakthrough, this was in May 2020, artificial life breakthrough announced by scientists. And since then, we know that artificial life has been created in the lab. Those who read Nature or New Scientists would have read lots of articles about this development. So the whole question of what it means to be human, what it means to be living, what is life itself, is coming under scrutiny and is open to doubt, if you like. The COVID-19, and what we discovered about the pandemic, that it's not just an ordinary disease, right? That there's something special about this pandemic. It is not like a pandemic in other pandemic in history, like the great, flu of 1920s, or other MERS or other kind of pandemics we've had. There's something very special about this pandemic, because this pandemic was not just a health problem, and it has in fact killed over 1 million people around the world. It was also a problem regarding travel. The whole travel industry came to a halt. Nothing moved. I mean, the clock ticked, but the time stood still. Nobody traveled. You couldn't travel anywhere. And it was, as a result of that, it was a major problem for tourism. The major tourist attractions were basically empty, right? So it was inflicting economic damage at the same time as health damage, as well as tourism damage. And the shops were all closed. the economy didn't move. In Britain, for example, the shop remained closed till about 2 months ago. Everything was delivered at home. You couldn't go out. You couldn't go out to the malls or to the shopping center. Only a few supermarkets were open. And it was also a culture problem, because the theaters, the cinemas, all variety of comedy shows, and they were empty. You couldn't get in. I mean, everything was closed, including entertainment business, right, in a sense. And it was also a religious problem. I don't think we've had so few pilgrims in the history of Hajj as we had last year. Normally we get 2.5–3 million pilgrims, but of course, given the nature of the pandemic, this could not be allowed. So it was also a religious problem. We can also show you the pictures, if you like, of what's going on and what happened in Vatican. The Vatican, St. Peter's Square is normally crowded. I've been there a number of times, absolutely crowded people. But if you look at the photographs during the pandemic, it's totally empty. And there's a very interesting photograph of the Pope addressing the empty square, empty St. Peter's Square. So it was also a religious problem. But the pandemic wasn't the only thing. I mean, many people have missed two very important facts. One is that, as this article in Scientific American suggests, deadly fungus is the nearest emerging microbe all over the world. In fact, it's not emerging anymore because we know that in India, lots of people who were infected with COVID-19 Delta variant also had a fungus in their eye. Many people died of the fungus rather than COVID-19. And at the same time, there's a serious shortage of antibiotics. In fact, there are more and more antibiotic resistance bacteria out there, and we are running short of antibiotics. Soon, there won't be any antibiotics at the same time. And all this kind of news has been missed because pandemic is the main news story. And over the last 4 or 5 years, post-truth phenomena has actually really taken hold, and numerous books have come out, because the post-truth phenomena is now not just simply limited to Donald Trump and his followers. It is on social media. In India, for example, it manifests itself as a denial of Islamic history. There's a whole Hindu fundamentalist movement that denies the Islamic history of India at all and suggests that the Mughals were invaders and the Muslims were basically invaders, imperialist invaders who have played no part in the history of India. So the whole notion of post-truth now has really kind of embedded in society. It's not just about politics, it's also about knowledge, it's also about history, it's also about education. So have a look at this. This is the famous.
Somebody's version of the truth, not the truth.
Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like.
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
Truth isn't truth. This is going to become a bad.
So truth isn't truth. That's essentially the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, if you like. In a sense, whether you're talking about knowledge, whether you're talking about politics, whatever you're talking about, truth isn't truth. And there are always alternative facts, so-called, which people will argue and present to you, including scholars. And one of the other very kind of, for us, pretty shocking development is the emergence of fascism in Europe. Now, we were talking about European Union and Brexit, But cast your mind back to the origins of the European Union. What was the function of the European Union? When it was formed? It was formed so that there is no place for fascism in Europe. We could never allow this to happen, what the words used, right? But now we have this very strange phenomena that fascist parties and far-right parties are major players in Europe, right? So in France, 1 in 3 people vote for the far-right party. In certain places, the far-right is in power, like in Poland and Hungary, right? But the most interesting thing is that almost a quarter of all the members of European Parliament are also fascist, belong to far-right parties. So here you have a very strange phenomena, an organization that was created to actually completely ban fascism, even in terms of thought and ideas, let alone physical manifestation of fascism, is now the incubator of fascism. And many of these parties use the European Union platform to spread their message. And of course, Shamim already talked about the climate change. The glaciers are melting, the climate emergency is causing very, very serious problems, right? The glaciers are melting, the polar bears have nowhere to go. And as a result, the sea level rising and the consequence of sea level rising on certain Muslim countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, the Maldives are quite profound. In fact, it is estimated the Maldives as a country would disappear within the next 20 years. There's a very famous photograph of the Maldives cabinet having a meeting, and the cabinet meeting is being held under the ocean. They're trying to communicate the message that, look, we are drowning. And of course, we saw earlier on the temperature was rising. I don't think we can move this one. Yeah. And the most interesting thing is that the hottest temperature that most countries have experienced have been in the last 2 years. Right. So all these countries have experienced kind of the highest level of temperatures. The highest level of temperatures was recorded last year and in the Death Valley in United States, something like 54.5. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jody. But I just received a newsletter a couple of days ago, which says that temperature has now been exceeded, and there's a new highest temperature. Right. So this is happening. This is happening this very, very moment, and the cities that are at worst risks from climate change over the next 20 years actually belong to what we would regard as the Muslim world. They are in Africa, in Asia, as this graph shows. So this is reality. This is the present. This is what's happening now. It's not the future. And we've never experienced. I mean, there've been hurricanes. There've been hurricanes throughout history, but they tend to now come in kind of in groups, as collectives. This is the first photograph taken of 4 hurricanes simultaneously occurring simultaneously. That's never happened in history before. Right? And of course, the fires. A couple of years ago, virtually half of Australia was under fire. That's phenomenal. That kind of fire. And now, of course, we've seen California. Last year, also California. My sister lives in California, and she's been kind of sending us reports. I mean, phenomenal damage from fire. And now, of course, the fires have returned, and it is estimated that these fires, this year, fires will be even greater than last year. And in our own part of the world, this is the Nile. Have a look at this.
This is the majestic Nile, the world's longest river, crucial to the survival of millions of people. But now the river's existence is threatened like never before.
Everywhere you walk, it's all plastic.
For the first time, we will reveal the full extent of plastic pollution across 5 countries.
All of this, or large parts of it, could end up being
washed out
straight down.
And see how it's poisoning the fish in the water.
That's plastic in the middle of nowhere.
So that's today. You know, the Nile is dying this very moment in time, right? And how many countries will be affected by Egypt, you know, all the way from Egypt right down to Kenya, Somalia. And certain cities are just not fit for human habitat. And this is Bombay, one of the most polluted cities in the world. Now, you know, we've only started using masks because of the pandemic, but if you go down to Bombay or Delhi, you know, 5-6 years ago, you'll have to wear a mask because there's so much pollution. You know, your eyes will be covered with dust, your nose will be full of soot. And of course, this is just one example of Bombay, but you know, there are other cities in the Muslim world which are facing similar kind of level of pollution. But something else is happening in terms of knowledge, as I was saying. Conventionally, for example, we always thought of mathematics as a kind of neutral discipline, but now it's emerging that mathematics can be used as a weapon of destruction. A great deal of AI is based on big data, and big data is essentially biased. This is why AI is biased, and some of the mathematics involved in that is actually used to manipulate ideas, to manipulate people, and it's not just that this mathematics is about you know, kind of things that can be measured. We conventionally thought that could be measured, but now our aspirations can be measured, our likes and dislikes can be measured, our emotion can be measured and quantified, right? So I mean, virtually everything we do can be turned into statistics and data. You know, our deepest desires, or even our dreams, right, and can be used against us. And certain disciplines, we've always known, for example, anthropology, you know, was essentially about managing and controlling the other people, but now, of course, it's been weaponized. So many disciplines that we conventionally thought, you know, were kind of friendly and neutral, if you like, are being weaponized. And some of these disciplines we teach in our own universities in Muslim countries very innocently, not knowing exactly what's going on. And of course, we've heard the ransomware and the hackers and all that. I mean, we only last week there was the news about, you know, ransomware in America. Many American multinationals and companies were kind of held at ransom. But there's also another type of hacking that is going on. That's biohacking. We can now encode malware in our DNA, right? And it can be done. And in fact, give it a couple more years, and people will start doing precisely that. Now, the CRISPR, the gene editing technology has existed for well over 10 years, 10, 12 years. And CRISPR makes editing genes relatively easy. But now there's new technology that can make editing genes even easier and can be bought over the internet, right? So of course, some people will start kind of experimenting with this technology on themselves, and then soon they will move on to others. So the whole idea of what it means to be human what is really kind of under attack, if you like, is not is being questioned. It's been questioned by technology. It's been questioned by social media. It's been questioned by post-truth. And so, very recent, we have a human-monkey embryo. This is regarded as a major scientific breakthrough, but what are the ethical dimensions of this? If we have a human-monkey embryos, what is to say we won't have human dog entities, right, or human and other animal entities coming up soon. Yeah, and much of the education system around the world is also having a serious. This is the cover from a very respected educational journal in America, Chronicle Review. And the cover story is that higher education is drowning in bullshit. Yeah, and it's morally corrosive of society. The most interesting thing is that about 3 years ago, all the students of the economic department of University of Manchester came out protesting that they do not want to learn economics because economics does not make sense. In fact, it is making the world worse rather than better. So eventually the protest grew, and the faculty and the lecturers and professors also joined in, right? And there was a kind of a standoff. And Manchester University then reached an agreement with the student leaders, that 3 or 4 student leaders, and said, okay, write down your grievances, right? And we will publish them. The University of Manchester Press, University of Manchester Press will publish it. And so these students and others did write down why they think they should not be studying economics. And the book was called Rethinking Economics, which was first published by University of Manchester Press. But it was so successful that it came out as Penguin paperback, and then now has become a standard text in certain universities and has come out as Routledge academic text. Right. So something fascinating is going on here. If you just step back and think of all the different things I've said, right? What's happening. So this advertisement from the Economics Explains.
It's a noisy, chaotic, confusing world. If only everyone could see it more clearly, separate faith from fact. If only we all understood what's really going on. The world needs another economist reader.
So what is going on? I don't think that economists, just reading the Economist will actually help us, but the advertisement actually sums it up. That it's a complex, chaotic world with a great deal of uncertainty, right? What is happening to the present? What is happening to the world at this moment in time? So you should not be surprised. We are lost, we are confused, unsure, unclear, perplexed, disoriented, bewildered. I mean, these are just a few things, but something's really profoundly is happening to the world at this moment in time. So you should not be surprised that a lot of scholars have actually spent a lot of time studying what is going on and trying to understand. So one of the first one to say that something strange is going on was Zygmunt Bauman, the late Zygmunt Bauman, who was a British sociologist, renowned sociologist. In his book, he describes the present as liquid time, that the time has kind of, solid time has disappeared and everything is becoming liquid. Thomas Friedman, the conservative American economist and columnist for the New York Times, calls it global weirding. And he has a book. All these that I'm going to cite now are books that you can go and get and read from your libraries or buy them. Robert Colwell, the American technologist, calls it the great acceleration, that things are accelerating so fast that we don't know what to do, and this is why we are confused and lost and perplexed. Alan Curtis, the British documentary maker, calls it hyper-normalization. And he has a 90 minutes documentary that you can download from YouTube, which actually summarizes that, and it's really worth looking at that documentary. And Eugene Stormer, who was a geologist, suggested that we have now left geological time, previous geological times, and we have now entered a new geological age, the Anthropocene. And in fact, the other geologists agreed with him, and the American Geological Society the International Geological Society actually declared that we are now in the age of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is essentially a period where human actions can change the geology and ecology of the planet. This has never happened in history. That's a very unique thing that now we are facing at this moment in time. Never before in the history of time, our activities, our collective activities, all the different things we do, all the travel we do, all the pollution we produce, all the plastic we put in the Nile, the temperature rises, the sea level rises, the temperature of the sea, and so on and so forth. All the activities we do are having direct impact on the geology and the ecology of the planet. So we are actually changing the planet itself, hence the climate change. James Bildel, another British science writer, calls it the new dark age. Roger Hellman is the founder of Extinction Rebellion, the social protest movement, and his argument and the argument of the movement is that we are facing serious extinctions if we do not do something about it. And Susanna Zuboff, who's a professor at Harvard, had just come up with this book, came out last year, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, where she's arguing that capitalism itself is not what it used to be. It has transformed completely. It has transformed completely. So the conventional commodities of capitalism are still there, but we have new commodities. The new commodities are human beings and their desires, their likes and dislikes, their loves and their hates, and what they buy and what they don't buy. So we are the commodity now. The human identity, the human self is the main commodity of capitalism. And for capitalism to thrive, it must put the human being under surveillance. So we are constantly surveyed so that every action can be turned into some sort of data, which can then lead to some sort of profit for some company. So numerous scholars, I've only given you a few examples here because of lack of time, but there are there's numerous books out there talking about what is going on in the world, why is the present so profoundly changed, and and what are the consequences, what consequences will there be for this change. So this was the normal. So what I did when I was editor of Futures, and in fact, when I was about to relinquish the chair of the editor, I was asked to kind of summarize what I had learned, editing Futures for 13 years. And it was obvious from reading all those papers that what we conventionally took as normal did not apply anymore. The normal did not make sense, and we were in a totally different period, which we called post-normal times. The normal is what we took as conventional, traditional, standard, basic assumptions. All those just do not work anymore, and we have moved into a kind of new times. The present, is now in a new era, if you like, and we call it the post-normal times. Now, this is post-normal times is not the end period, but it's a in-between period. So this is my definition, original definition of post-normal times. This is the in-between period where all orthodoxies are dying. See, all orthodoxies about modernity, postmodernism, capitalism, neoliberalism, you take all the conventional stuff, all what has shaped the world over the last 100 years, all those things, they are dying. New ones have not yet emerged. And this is why nothing really makes sense. Right? This is why there's so much uncertainty. So then the old paradigms become either irrelevant or weak, and there are no new paradigms in their place to make sense of things. So this is what we mean by post-normal times. This is another definition by the Italian journalist E. Moro, and he says we are living in the interim between what is no longer and what is not yet, and thus we are necessary unstable. So it's the same sort of idea. Right? So the post-normal times theory is essentially is a stepping back and looking at the current present as a whole. So all of these studies are correct, but they're looking at from a specific perspective. They're looking at specific things rather than, for example, global weirding is essentially about economics. The Anthropocene idea is about, the geological idea. So what we are trying to do in post-normal times is to look at to step back and look at the whole. So we want to look at the elephant completely. The story of the blind man and the elephant. One of them is, on the trunk, and he says, the elephant is like a tree, and another one is holding the tail and saying elephant is like a rope. So all of them are correct in their context, but the elephant is something different. And what we are trying to do is step back and look at the elephant completely, the whole planet, what in terms of change and what is exactly happening. That's what post-normal times theory tries to do. So, but for the theory to hold, we need to explain a couple of things. First of all, what is causing this post-normal change, right? Where does it come from? What are the main kind of drivers of this change? Now, this is Justin Secka, who was a vice president for communication of a big multinational company. And being vice president of communication, one would expect that she knew a great deal, she knows a great deal about communication. She was going from Los Angeles to Johannesburg, and she sent this tweet, going to Africa, hope I don't get it, just kidding, I'm white. Right. Now, this can be interpreted in a number of ways, but within minutes, there were millions of people denouncing her. And by the time she arrived in Johannesburg, she was fired. Right. This happened very, very fast. Now, what happened was that whatever her action spread around the world with great speed, right? Phenomenal speed. And it reached a global level. The scope of her action was global, even though she was doing something simple, just tweeting in an individual tweet. It spread around the world. The scope was global at a great speed, right? And it reached an individual scale that numerous individuals reacted to her tweet. So speed, scope, and scale are basic driving features of post-normal change. But there's one other thing. That's Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. And he noticed something interesting. He was asked, why are we, what is going on? There's so many crises in this crisis, why can't you do something about them? And he said, we are living through an era like no other. There are multiple crises, a food crisis, fuel crisis, flu crisis, financial crisis. Each is a crisis we have not seen for many years, even generations. But this time they are hitting the world all at once. That is the point. That it's not just that we have, of course, historically, we have faced many famines. There have been food crises. There was a fuel crisis, say, for example, in 1972, when OPEC came to power. We've had flu pandemics and so on and so forth. But what is unique now is that these are happening simultaneously. So simultaneity is important. So there are four main drivers of post-normal change: speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity, what we call the 4 S's. And we can also see that these 4 S's work in positive sense as well. That Justin Saka example is a negative example, but here is an example which is a more positive, if you like, that we had Malala Yousafzai, a young girl who was shot by the Taliban. She came to London, and within a year, not just that she was cured, but she became a global icon. She spoke at the United Nations. She won the Nobel Prize, and she published her autobiography. That's that in this very short period, phenomenal. And here's another person who only 2 years ago was totally ignored, and she's a teenager. She was just standing outside the Swedish parliament saying, I'm on strike, because people are not doing anything about climate change. And of course, today she's a global icon. She's spoken to the United Nations. She's spoken at Davos and been on the covers of numerous, many documentaries have done. In fact, there's a biographical documentary of her which came out in Sky News only 6-8 months ago. So speed, scope, and scale also could have positive effect. It suggests that individual does have certain agency, but how do you know, right? When you do something which will lead to a positive result and which will lead to a negative result. Another example, in 2006, this lady is called Tamara Burke. She started the Me Too movement, but in 2006, the Twitter wasn't, the kind of global obsession, and Facebook hadn't reached kind of every part of the globe. Me Too did not spread very rapidly, but 10 years later, when this actress, Elisa Milano, in 2017, and she tweeted the same tweet, it went all global instantly, and we have seen the impact of Me Too in the last 2 or 3 years. It has led to colossal changes in Hollywood. It may even lead to changes in American law and so on and so forth. So post-normal change is speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity. That is what is causing all these phenomena that I described earlier on. But what are these phenomena actually leading to? What is speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity taking us towards? Where, in which direction are they pushing us? Right? Where are we going? So the first thing to realize that the speed of change, speed, scale, scope, and simultaneity of change has produced a complex world. We now have to appreciate that we live in a complex, interconnected world where problems are interlinked. They cannot be solved in a conventional method of isolating and just attacking it. The pandemic is a very good example. As I pointed out, pandemic was not just a health issue, it's also an economic issue, it's an employment issue, it's a tourism issue, it's a religious issue. I mean, it's a complex problem, interconnected problem, right? So the problems we face are complex, and they cannot be, the conventional method of solving problems just does not work anymore, or it works less and less. So this is essentially a complex system on the move, a dynamic. These are the birds flying. So that's what we are dealing with. We are dealing with a dynamic, changing system that is complex and interconnected. This is the map of Afghanistan. Few years ago, about almost 10 years ago, the American military asked Coin Dynamics, a firm that specializes in analyzing complex systems, to build a complex, to tell them what is the situation in Afghanistan. How can they bring stability to Afghanistan? Now, this is a two-dimensional map, and you must see it as a three-dimensional entity, because there's no way to represent these complex things in a flat map. But you can see the interconnections of tribes, popular support, various American and European kind of military forces, the Taliban, the Afghan military, the warlords, the poor in the middle, the innocent, all the kind of institutions, all this interconnection. And so the Coin Dynamics people told the American journal who was in charge that if you understand this map, you will win the war. But of course, we know that he did not understand and understood the map, could not appreciate, could not really understand the complexity involved in the whole situation. And we now see the Americans leaving Afghanistan in an even bigger mess than when they arrived. So complexity is nothing in governance, in contemporary governance, whether you're governing a country or a province, nothing in governance is simple nowadays. It's very complex and very interconnected. And that's why many governments are having serious problems in managing societies and managing economies and so on and so forth. So complexity is one of the outcomes of post-normal change. Another example, which you may not have thought of, is the whole LGBT. When I was some years ago, when the United Kingdom Commission for Equality was established, I was one of the first commissioners, and I was responsible for religion, in introducing religious equality. A colleague of mine was responsible for LGBT, and he had to deal with lesbian, gays, bisexual, and trans. But I was in the commission for about 6 years, and then my place was taken by another commissioner, and then and so was the LGBT commissioner was also changed. And when I spoke to the new commissioner, he says, well, you had, my previous guy had a simple life. He only had to deal with 4 varieties, right? But now I have to deal with all these varieties, right? And I haven't met the current commissioner, but if I were to ask him, he will tell me that he has to now deal with all these varieties. Now, these are mind-boggling varieties, right, of sexual varieties. But the important thing is that they demand attention, right? And not just in the West, but also in Muslim countries. But in the West, for example, in universities, all these groups have their own societies, and the student union is obliged to provide funding for them. So there's a real kind of issues involved. So if you go down to the Durham Society LGBT plus section of the Durham Students Union, you find that they provide funding for all these people, all these different varieties, mind-boggling varieties. So here's the complexity that we have not appreciated in the past. And some of them, of course, me coming from a Muslim background, I mean, the mind, I mean, I just do not know what to say. So complexity. Then there's another thing. So this is a simple photograph of two American school pupils. One is holding something that is banned in America, so they can be protected. And the other one, they can take in the classrooms or, you know, in school. Well, if you haven't guessed, it's that Kinder Egg, because Kinder Egg, when you eat it, it contains some small toy, so the toy could get stuck in pupils' throat and choke them. So it's banned. But of course, weapons are allowed in schools, knives, guns. So what do we see here? This is a phenomenally vast contradiction, right? So it's not just things are complex, but they're also contradictory. And often they feed on each other. Complexity often generates contradictions, and contradictions often produce complexity. So we got, and of course, the most obvious example is the division between rich and poor, vast division, right, throughout the world, not just between nations, but within nations, you know, and within nations, you know, in communities themselves, right? Vast difference. Again, I'm only giving two examples of each. If you really want to get more examples, you can go to the Postnormal Times later. I think Jody has given the link where we got umpteen, you know, hundreds and hundreds of examples of things. So complexity and contradictions are the outcome of post-normal change, but there's one other thing that we have already experienced, you know, since 2008, chaos. So this is the financial collapse, chaos. But chaos need not be a major big thing. Chaos can happen anywhere, and it can happen in small doses as well as big doses. So have a look at this. So you may think that people are running away because there's some sort of violence going on, or, you know, earthquake or what. But in fact, they're all looking for this thing. It's a Pokemon. This is Seoul in South Korea, and it's just looking for a non-existent entity, right? I mean, these things are just they just exist in a little device, right? Has caused major chaotic event. So even insignificant small things can lead to chaos, not just, you know, financial chaos that we saw in the collapse of the bank, but small things as well. And one of the most interesting things about chaos is this phenomenon. Okay, does it go? No. Yeah, it doesn't move. Okay, sorry. So these are jellyfish. The jellyfish are over Muscat. I mean, they are the center for post-normal times kind of main thing. The jellyfish are very interesting things. They carry on their business without any problem, right? You know, in their individual capacity, they can wonder about the ocean, etc., etc. But then something happens, and they suddenly bloom together and create a chaotic event. So jellyfish, for example, have been known to bring nuclear power stations to a grinding halt in Finland, in Israel, and in Philippines. They brought the American carrier Eisenhower, one of the biggest and most powerful aircraft carriers in the world. It is estimated that it has more firepower than the Roman Empire and all the other empires of history put together. But jellyfish brought it down in Melbourne when he was decking there. And in fact, it's nuclear powered machine, and there was almost a kind of meltdown. They had to kind of limp out from the port and then kind of go deep dive and get all the jellyfish out from there. So jellyfish mushroom quite suddenly. But this mushrooming of jellyfish, even though it's sudden, is not without a cause. What jellyfish really like is salty, hot water. And what is happening around the world is that the temperature of the sea is rising, and it's already risen by 2 or 3 degrees, which is enough for jellyfish to bloom. That's what they come together because it's warm water and there's lots of salinity in that sense. So jellyfish then kind of become a symbol of, if you like, of post-normal times. So 3 C's, the 4 S's lead us to 3C. We need to appreciate complexity. We need to appreciate contradictions, and we have to beware that both of these phenomena can, through positive feedback, lead to chaos. And the chaos could be major events, there could be minor events, there could be in a local community as well as a nation state or at a global level. Now the thing about complexity and contradictions and chaos is that you can't really deal with them in conventional way. Complex systems require complex approaches to solve them. Contradictions, and I'm not just talking about here of conflicts, between one political state disagreeing with another political state. I'm also talking about serious logical contradictions. Contradictions cannot often be resolved. They have to be transcended. And chaos can both be a disastrous as well as an opportunity. So when a system actually reaches the edge of chaos, it has 2 possibilities. It collapses or it emerges in a new order. So if you allow the things to go or carry on, we are already at the edge of chaos. This is the basic point of post-normal times theory, that the present is at the edge of chaos. So, and we have 2 options here. We have one option of collapse and the other option of creating a new order. And creating the new order is what post-normal times is all about. How do we move towards a new order? New way of thinking, new way of knowledge production, a new way of being human. How do we ensure that our values, our tradition, what we hold, what we cherish most, our morality, our ethics, right, are part and parcel of the future. And so essentially in post-normal times, we have to navigate ourselves towards a desirable future. So it's all about navigation. It's learning how to navigate complexity, chaos, and contradictions, and moving towards a viable future, not blindly, not by embracing all the technology that is coming our way, not by just blindly saying all AI is good, or all, gene editing is a wonderful new technology, right? Or saying that post-truth is fine, or post-truth only exists in the West. It doesn't have any role to play in Muslim societies. We can't turn blind eyes to some of the contemporary phenomena. So if we want to create a viable future for ourselves, if we want to return to being a civilization that we once were, then we have to learn to navigate chaos, contradiction, and complexity. We have to learn to appreciate what post-normal times is all about, what the present is all about. And only through appreciating what the present is all about can we move forward to the kind of future that we desire, with our values, our traditions, our morality intact. And I emphasize the last point. It's all about moving forward to a viable future where our values, our morality, our traditions, our rich history is intact. That's essentially what it's all about. So welcome to Post-Normal Times, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor. It was really actually very fruitful. I would just like to highlight the concept of post-truth, where we all living in a society that the shared objective standards of truth are actually missing. It's like a fuzzy gray area that is a part of a composing complexity, contradictions, and even the chaos that we were just mentioning, which itself emphasizes on the importance of what just happened and what is happening now. From that on, let me introduce our last host for today. Riyad Khalil Hawari is a consultant specializing in strategy and leadership. He helped major organizations in the Arab region from the public, private, and non-profit sectors in planning strategic development and human capital performances. He is a certified trainer with several international educational institutions in the field of leadership and innovation. He has trained over thousands in the Arab region of institutions and individuals over more than 15 years in the field of capacity building through designing learning experiences, professional and leadership development, as well as innovation and design thinking. Riyad has many publications, research papers, and training manuals in the areas of leadership, personal guidance, and management metrics. He is the founder and manager of several companies and organizations as the Horizon Learning, Training and Education Solution based in the UK, Qudra Strategic Capacity for Social Innovation Solutions in Bahrain, and Cyber Company for Analysis, Strategies, and Innovation in Turkey. I will leave you all with the floor with him, and I hope you have a very enjoyable last session. By the way, this session will be in Arabic, so I suggest you all put the translation to English if you want to listen in English.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الإخوة الكرام الأفاضل المشاركون في هذا المنتدى والملتقى التخصصي النوعي. بداية أشكر منتدى أسبار على الدعوة لأن نكون ضمن هذا اللقاء متحدثا عن قضية مهمة جدا هي تتعلق في التصميم للمستقبل، وسيكون حديثي عن الفطنة المستقبلية وبنائها، بالذات أني سأنطلق هذه المرة من منطقة العالم العربي. بروفيسور ضياء والبروفيسور جوردي انطلقوا من رؤية عالمية أو رؤية متقدمة للعالم العربي والإسلامي. ربما سأتي من رؤية بنائية كما يقولون، أبدأ من الأسفل إلى الأعلى. ربما يعني هذا اللقاء لن أطيل به كثيرا، أتحدث عن محاولة تكوين تصور عن الفطنة المستقبلية التي تسمى future equipment وبنائها، وأهمية أن تكون حاضرة في ممارساتنا. ولعل من طريف اللغة العربية أن كلمة التصميم في اللغة العربية جاءت يعني لتحمل التصميم، أن تصمم تخطط لأمر وتعمل على إيجاده مستقبلا لعناصره وأجزائه، وأيضا تحمل مضمون الإرادة. عندما نقول ينظر إلى أموره بجد وتصميم، فالإرادة على فعل أمر ما. ولعل التصميم للمستقبل هذا يعني المنطلق الذي أريد أن أنطلق منه عندما أتحدث عن هذه الكلمة. إرادتنا على أن نصمم مستقبلنا بعيدا عن أي نوع من التبعية المستقبلية.
Under the umbrella or under the colonization, as Professor Sadar has said, when he talks about the colonization of the future, or I would also base this on another point, that items of the future acumen, and which I define those as to be able to link a long-term vision which we would like to achieve with what we do today in our reality. So it seems the making of the future starts from today. With the awareness of today, I would show you what I call the interactive common or coalition. So because this is not one point, I would show you at the end some of the practices at the end, but there are 4 main areas which I see are important in the Arab area about how to design the future, which starts from empowering people. I believe that the human being is always the pillar as well. I took then after you empower the person, you make him understand the acumen of the current position. You can answer the question about where you want to go in the future, and the aspired for future, how to design for the future, and at the end, what we call the empowerment or the empowering tools, the end to close this gap between the current situation and the future we want to design. Let's start with to talk about the components of the interactive mix. We start with the human being. I am always interested in human beings. I see the human being is always the beginning, especially when we talk about the leaders who want to go to the future. Here I'm talking about some of the words which are important, which we would like to see in the future in the Arab world, things which we want to see when we talk about empowering people, creative curricula, managing gifts, facilitating changing of the systematic change. When we talk about leadership, which is motivating for people to get experiences, lenient, for example, leadership, which is flexible. When we talk about the culture of experiencing, when we talk about the culture of involving yourself in finding solutions so that the people are going to find those. This is a good space. We can add more to this in regard. So the key is the human being. The second part of the mix that I'm talking about here, which we mention in when we talk about the future acumen, is to understand the reality, to being clever enough to deal with this current situation in a complex way. So understanding the current situation superficially is going to lead you to the wrong direction in the future, and that's what Dr. Diadin had mentioned. He had said that it happened so far. He's talking about understanding the data today, or understanding the information we have today so that we can go to the future in the correct manner. We talk about social acumen. We talk about designing, about futuristic understanding, policies, analyzing the future we want to reach. We talk here about also what Dr. Dia had mentioned, the data, how it was used racially speaking, how it was biased, which was not suitable for the Arab world and Islamic world's logic. This big data, this open data had become a source to occupy our future, to also design our behavior instead of being based on what we want to achieve. He talked about the experiences which we need to design if you want to understand the reality. So without fooling ourselves by thinking we are in a certain position while we are not. And the second space is also important. I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the things we need to concentrate on in this part of the mix. The third part of the mix is the solutions space. How are you going to design the future? Here we are talking about labs to understand the future labs. We are talking about camps of creativity. We're talking about creation and innovative labs, also social innovative labs. Here we're talking about the participatory approach of so we need to move from the individualistic work to the participatory work, to dialogue, to design your work based on understanding the society, to understand the future, so that you understand what you want to have in the future in regard to the money, how to make it a power, also to how are you going to also use the Arab values, for example, in the future, so that we can have finances which don't have interest rates. Maybe we'll have finances which have more social equity in regard to the richness distribution to keep the assets of the society. All those are Islamic or cultural understanding we have and values we have. So we have a big space here. We need to have people to be involved. We need to train the people so that they are part of the solution, so that they can design for this future. And this is an open space for those which will help us design the solutions. So fourth, the technology, the empowering tools, and they are the end at the end, because I consider those to be designed based on what we decided upon first. So we need to understand the reality. So to reach the future, there is a technological space where we need to select tools which will be able to give us what we want, not what is designed to us by others. As had the scholars had mentioned when they talked about the presuppositions, and that it's important to create your future, because if you don't have a plan for your future, you'll be part of the plan of others. One of the things that was used so that we are part of the future of others is the technology itself. We found ourselves in the gap of technology, in the gap of the tools. Those four things, if they have been put together, I believe we would be able to have triggering practices. If we have this interactive mix together, we will have this area which will have the motivating factors. We can start designing our future. We have here a new system of thinking. We have a different practices, the different tools, the different mindset we want here. Part of it was mentioned today when there was a mentioning of the mindset, which talks about that the future can start from today, and that foreseeing the future is something which, or forecasting the future is something which you made. It's not something which you foresee. So you're not dealing with imaginary things. To be ready for the scenarios, to be also prepared for the risks, that changes which are not expected. This is part of the culture of the Muslims and the Arabs, which is to prepare. We're talking here about a mentality which believes that we need to move within what is possible, so that we have a space to be able to solve in the future what we think is impossible. There is this full system of thinking which we need to have, our leaders shall have in the Islamic world, which is the mindset or the future acumen, which makes them it's possible for us to be able to exit those painful arenas we have today to forward. There is this number, and there is the mindset, and there is also a system of behaviors we shall do, on top of which is to think based on the human being, to have everything centered around the human being, so that whenever we design something, we design it around the human being with all the links, spiritualities of the human being, to respond to their spirituality, to provide an understanding for this life based on the spiritual values, balanced values. Yes, so we are using the wahi, we are using of course, the Islamic religion, of course, and the rest of the religions which also are in support for this, and the wisdom they came with. We need to base this on those practices. We want to work on what is called understanding the transformations in our own way, from our own perspective. Sometimes we listen to new words. When we take them as is, we say the digital transformation. What is the infrastructure you have in regard to the digital transformation? What do you need? How much do you need to reach this? We talked about that transformation, about the creating the leaders in the society, within the schools, or when you want to change the trends in schools. So the question is, what are the things which are needed? What are the things we want to create? What are the practices which will enforce this? And we need the system of tools. So the system of thinking, of spirituality, of system itself, behavior, and tools. So we need tools to be able to help us reach what you want. And as you know, that this see, do, get, change, circle of change. If you want to change what you get, you need to change the perspective you're looking from within. I believe this change in the Arab world is a good, important leadership step, and I believe this form and forms a lot, which are similar, will be the first steps in this direction. Dr. Wendy has mentioned those practices which will help lead this future. When I asked a number of experts about this, and asked them about the practices, do we have those in the academia of the Arab world? Do we have them in the training of the leaders? Here we are talking about scarcity of such trainings. So this is why we need to have labs to activate those practices. We know when we have, for example, the tool is not a goal in itself. It's like this stick of Archimedes when he said, give me a stone and a stick to change the world. So the tools are the stick which can move the stone. It's not the goal in itself, but if we have the tools, I believe we can move in a different manner from what we have currently. So you can see in those areas, for example, where what we concentrate on. And when we look at the impact of change, there are so many practices which are taught in the private sector, in the futuristic studies, or in the schools or academia. We have the wheels of the future. We have the maps of influence. We have 3 horizons, change mindsets. When we want to change, for example, the alternatives of the future, we see that there are a number of other tools. For example, access of uncertainty scenarios. We have also designed experiential futures. And on the level of the awareness, before we start, we need to know that what is the change. The awareness of change is important and has a number of important practices here. On top of which, what we have as called is screening or the cards of the future, are analyzing the new emerging issues and analysis. The preferred future, there are a number of things here. The workshops for the futures, futuristic studies, and there's the Suhail Inayatullah methodology, who had written an rich thing in this field. This is what we have. I believe using the emerging issues analysis and causal layered analysis, I believe he gave us this dictionary definition, which is important, and the rest also data mining, for example, emerging issues analysis, wildcards, the rest. So these are some of the practices which have been, if they have been merged with our practices in our activities, even the researchers, they can use those, and this would give them different results. At the end, this interactive mix to build the future acumen is based on the understanding of the human being, on the future, of the understanding of the present, of creating the future or designing it, and then on the tools. So we have a good space between those 4 to build for the future. This is quickly what I wanted to share with you. To design the map of the future in the Arab world, and this is still a map which we are experimenting with, and I believe this form is one of the forms which will help us crystallize the results of this. Thank you very much. I hope that I have been capable of summarizing this, and I hope that this would be leading to also practices in the field and additions in the Arab world. And the Islamic world, thank you very much for listening. Peace be upon you. All due thanks to Allah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giyad, for this fruitful, practical recap, let us call it. And it was actually very enjoying, and I hope everyone just got what they wanted to get from this seminar. From here, before we end, we will have a small session of questions. If anyone had or have a question, please write it down in the chat box, and I will make sure to get as much questions as we can. So I will start with the first question. You all can hear me, right?
Yep.
All right. So starting with the first question, it's in English from Ahmed Hariri. Can the speaker shed light on the expected demographic changes as a result of environmental crisis? I think this was for Mr. Shamim, but he is not here anymore. So if anyone would like to...
Jody can take it. Jody?
Sure. We can't hear you.
Yes, I was asking if maybe we can stop sharing because I feel people will see me very small.
Yeah, I think, can we stop sharing here?
The screen, I mean. So you see, the thing is that there is not so much data about the impact of climate change on demographics. So, now better. Generally, what demography does is it works with several scenarios. So like higher growth, smaller growth. The thing is that demography as a trend is very heavy. So even under conditions of harsh change, like climate change, maybe it would not, let's say the main trend would not variate so much, but there's a huge but, which is migrations. Migrations is the one element that always messes up demographic analysis. And what we know is that climate change can become a major factor in fostering migrations, particularly because some places may become inhabitable. Zia was talking about some of these Pacific states like Maldives, but also Tuvalu and others. They are trying to get land in other places, but it's very hard for them. So what are they going to do? They will, if the place where they live sinks, they will have to go somewhere. What will people do in places that become unbearably hot? They will try to move to places with better climate. So some Western countries are beginning to work in what they call big migration scenarios, because they are beginning to realize that the countries on the northern part will become attractive destinations for many people in other places. Rich people are already moving to New Zealand because it's like becoming a golden spot for wealthy people. But poor people just will try to move any way they can, as they are doing just right now.
I think that the 2 or 3 things we can say. First of all, it's a quite established trend that the population of the Muslim world is younger. In countries like Iran, Pakistan, Egypt, the average age is below 30. So what that means is that the Muslim population will continue to grow. Demographically, it will continue to grow. Unless something drastic happens, we will see an increase in Muslim population. At the same time, the population in United States and Europe is getting older and older. The average age in Europe is around 55 or something like that. So the population in Europe and most Western countries will decline, while the population in Muslim countries will grow. That we can say with certain level of confidence. The second thing we can say with certain level of confidence is that the first impact of climate change will be on Muslim countries. The Muslim countries constitute what we call the global middle belt. The Muslim civilization itself described itself as a global middle belt. We are the global middle belt because we go from Morocco all the way to Indonesia, so all that equatorial region, right? And this is where most of the impact of climate change will be. Temperature rise, we've already seen temperature rises, the impact of sea level rises, and so on and so forth. So that's the third thing we can say with some confidence is that the new wave of environmental refugees will be mostly Muslims. I think that Shamim got the figure slightly wrong. 2 out of 3 refugees at this moment in time in the world are Muslim. With the emergence of new environmental refugees as a consequence of climate change, we estimate that 4 out of 5 refugees in the world will be Muslim within the next 10 to 15 years. And these are quite huge demographic shifts. So this is what we can say with confidence.
All right, very great. Moving on with the second, I think I will be able to take 3 questions with short answers, okay. So we can end it very briefly. So coming to the next question, it's in Arabic. إلى أي علم ممكن أن
science can we classify, or which field can we classify the futuristic studies?
Okay.
In which field?
Okay. What's the second question? Oh, do you want that immediately, or do you want to ask all 3 first?
No, let's get with this one and then I'll ask the last one.
Right. So future studies is both, but it's a complex interdisciplinary field. So it has aspects of social sciences. It also has aspects of natural sciences in places like where we have hard data. So it's both can be qualitative and quantitative, and it has a bit of humanities and arts as well. I mean, it requires some, to create a vision of the future, for example, requires some level of creativity, right? So it's a mix of that. That's why conventional universities departments in conventional universities do not teach the future. It's a complex thing. When you say the future of what? See, we can do the future of geology. It will be based on natural sciences. But if you do the future of the Arab world, right, it will be a totally different exercise, much more of a social science exercise. But if you say, what is the future of culture in the Arab world? So that becomes a much more of a art and culture-oriented topic in a sense. So future study is a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary endeavor. Right? You have to take all of these accounts. It's not easy to say it belongs into this box or that box.
Yeah, that's why a colleague of us claims that we should refer to futures as an intellectual domain more than a discipline.
Yeah. Okay, next question.
Please.
Okay, coming to the last question. It's also in Arabic. So, إن كنا لا نستطيع رسم صورة
we cannot have a clear vision about the current situation. How can we do that for the future if we don't know the present?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, yes. Right? Very interesting question. So what the question suggests is that there was a time when, in fact, we could do this, right? We had a better understanding of the present, so therefore we could develop a better understanding of the future. This is partly true when change was slow, when change was manageable. Now change is rapid and accelerating and not manageable, right? So exploring the future then becomes even more complex. And that's the point I was making when I was talking about being editor of futures. What I noticed is that, my earlier part of my editorship, most of the papers we published were reasonably confident in their forecasts. And I think some of them quite a few of them got it right as well. But as time went on, the forecasts became more troublesome and less reliable. So just take the example of Bank of England. The Bank of England, for example, 10 years ago, made reasonably good forecasts. And these forecasts are only for quarter or next 6 months. But for the last 4 or 5 years, their forecasts have been systematically wrong and sometimes drastically wrong, right? Because the world has become much more complex in that sense. So that makes exploring the future that much difficult and that much harder, right? But also that much urgent, right? Because if we don't do anything, if we don't do anything, for example, just let artificial intelligence run riot, soon we will be just like Uyghurs in China. You know, think about it. You know, just reflect on it. Just look at, I mean, you know, some of the technological developments that I described. So Jody wants to say them. Jody, come in.
No, I was trying to fix my camera. I got too close and out of focus. But since you've given me the opportunity, I'm sorry for being blurred. This is a very good question. You see, the thing is that the clues, the bottom line of the present is in the past. So there are things of the present that you cannot change because the moment to change the present is already gone. So if you wait to fully understand the present, given the urgency of the questions, it may take too long. Think of it as when a teenager has a mental problem. So you cannot help that teenager by doing psychotherapy that may take years because he needs the help now. He's growing, he's changing, it's a trouble time. So you need to find a solution fast enough not to make his childhood miserable. So sometimes in futures, you have to reach that kind of compromise. You try to get a good enough understanding of the present to move on into the future, because the challenges of the future are beginning to be so urgent that we do not have the luxury of spending all the time figuring out the present, because the future is going to happen so fast and that we will be totally unprepared. So we need to develop a balance. And that's why it's also useful to have this plural perspective of the future. Do not bet only in one possible future. Try to conceive alternative futures. Try to understand what is the logic leading to each one of them. And that may give you the clues you need to find the right answer for the present.
Okay, good. Next question.
Yeah.
Two people have raised their hands. Jody, you need to.
I am very sorry that I will not be able to take the people actually who are raising their hands because we are very, very restricted with time, and we still have 2 more sessions, which is one of them recommendations, and the ending session will be the ending closure, let us say, will be from Dr. Fahad about a scholarship he wants to announce. So let me just introduce Dr. Abdul Wahab. He's a PhD in Administrative Science and Sustainable Development Applications graduate, and he would like to introduce us the recommendations in the end. The floor is yours, and I'm very sorry again for the people who couldn't answer their questions. Our further events, we will be covering all what you have in mind. I'm sorry again. So the floor is yours, Abdul Wahab.
شكرا أستاذ همام. السلام عليكم.
Thank you very much, Mr. Humam. Peace be upon you all. I would like to thank and appreciate all the people who are present, and we apologize for not being capable of getting the questions of everyone. But we promise you that next time we will have more time to intervene and to ask questions from Dr. Sardar and Dr. Jordi. I'll announce now the recommendations of this firm in the name of Allah. Between your hands in the Futuristic Studies firm and the Postnormal Times, which had been convened in Zoom on the 14th of the 7th of 2021 as a summary. of the next 8 points. Thus, futuristic studies are considered today an important part of so many of the sciences in all the fields. And under it, there are so many terms which are important, like the forecasting the future, designing the future, making the visions for the futures, for the societies and the states. Second, that we need to have activities and work which also work on the futures forecasting and which concentrates on the solutions. And third, we need to base this on the values of each of the societies in regard to designing the solutions and making the future based on the human and the financial resources of the society itself. Four, we need to provide for educational tracks, which includes the tracks on the first elementary level and reaching to the tertiary level to help the students reach solutions for the challenges in front of the future of the society. Fifth, to provide for initiatives for the people working in the humanitarian fields in regard to the social field. Six, to support the initiatives in regard to exchanging of experience, culture, and publishing in regard to futuristic studies and designing solutions. Seven, the importance of launching the indicators studies and the field studies, which looks at the trends so that we help the decision makers in the society to develop the solutions for the future on the solid basis of work. Eight, to qualify the leaders so that they can adopt the administrative practices which supports the independence and the critical thinking for the future. All due thanks to Allah. And this was issued by Asbar Forum in Riyadh on this day. Now I leave you with Dr. Fahad Al-Arabi Al-Harithi to announce for this surprise for the people present. The floor is yours. Dr. Fahad, can you hear me?
دكتور فهد.
Dr. Fahad.
هناك إشكالية في التواصل مع الدكتور.
It seems that there is a problem in connection. We will try to solve it as soon as possible. Dr. Fahad, can you hear us now?
دكتور فهد تسمعني؟ اي تفضل دكتور.
الهوستس لازم طيب.
تفضل دكتور.
تسمعوني الحين؟
Can you hear me now? Yes, the floor is yours.
لا واضح يا دكتور تفضل.
It's clear. We can hear you well. Actually, today was a big day for us. Not just because of the ideas we've heard and the names, because of the names as well, which have participated in this important forum, which launches this new stage of work. This is a new step of the steps of Aspar International Forum, and this is paving the way for a new stage, which is to found for this science inside Saudi Arabia. Such a conference, I believe, is done for the first time in Saudi and maybe in the Arab world. And this shows that we are in the right direction and we are guided by the Vision 2030, the vision of Saudi Arabia for 2030, and the vision of the leader and the guide, His Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which is to make this society reach the future horizons in a way that it makes this nation the nation of aspiration, the nation which can achieve its road towards the future with all steady and planned steps based on the science. I believe that so many of the organizations in Saudi Arabia today are attempting with all efforts, on top of which Asbar forum to be in harmony with the aspirations of our government through this Vision 2030, and also the aspirations of the youth of Saudi, who are constituting between 15 and 32 or 34. They constitute 40% of the population of Saudi, and the youth with the children are about 70% of the population. So when we talk about them, we are talking about something important. And this is why I would like to thank at the end the scholars who have presented to us those important ideas, as I said, which are going to be the basis for the futuristic studies in Saudi. Dr. Diabdin Sarzar, Dr. Jordi Serra, Dr. Meisham Mia, Mr. Ghiath Hawari. As well, I would like to mention and thank the young man, the beautiful young man who had facilitated this conference, Hammam Hawari. I would like to thank also the translator, Ms. Noor Haqi, and I would like to thank Ms. Fatima Sharif and her team in the forum of Asbar, and Arwa Al-Sharif and her team. I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank who participated by being present here. I would like also, and I hope that you take into consideration those recommendations and to take them seriously so that we can start this new phase of studies in this field, which I believe is very important for the future of education, for the future of the society. Actually, the team of the forum had decided to, on the 26th of this current month, that we will have this educational course for the futuristic studies. We, as Asbar International Conference, we allocate in 20 scholarships which are free for people, which are, of course, I would request from the people present with us who have the conditions satisfied. We will send in a minute the conditions of our people to apply for this scholarship, and you can see it on our website of the forum or our Twitter account. You will see the conditions. They are easy ones, I would say. They are the main to be able to enter such a course. First, to have at least a BA in the social sciences, humanities, or other specialties as well, political science, for example. And the second request or demand is that you speak English, because this course is going to be in English. Even the references around the world in the futuristic studies are, and the people who are working in this, they are usually speak English, or they're usually in English. In Arabic, there are very few Arabic publications. In Arabic, there's no one dictionary for this futuristic study, except for 2 years ago when we established or we published the first encyclopedia for futuristic studies in Arabic. So this scholarship is the inauguration of this new phase, so that we can present as much as possible to Saudi Arabia, our country, to start with, and to the surrounding neighboring countries, to the Gulf, and to the rest of the Arab world. I believe it's high time to say thank you again to all of you. Thanks to the speakers, thanks to the organizers, thanks to whomever have helped in having this convened. And we will be communicating through social media, through our websites, our Twitter account, our Facebook account. Thanks to everyone. And I give the floor back to whomever would like to end.
Thank you so much, Dr. for this fruitful words and for this scholarship, let us say. It's going to be a really good one. And catch your seats, people. The link will be in the description. I mean, I think it will be on the chat now. We will be sending it. For everyone who wants to follow up on the missing parts of this event, it will be published or posted on Twitter accounts for Asbar Forum. Thank you all for attending. And again, I'm really sorry from everyone who couldn't answer or take their questions. in the coming days, in the coming times. Hope to see you all, and thank you all again for being here with us.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Peace be upon you all. Thank you very much. See you.